Welcome back. It's time to grab your board, catch a wave as we ride the sales pipeline with the founding father of sales pipelines himself, Matt Hines.
Oh my goodness, that's probably the best so far. The founding father. I am far from. Well, I am a father. I am far from founding anything related to sales pipeline.
I've waited a full year. I came up with that almost a year ago. I thought I got to wait for the 4th of July week to add you to the pantheon of founding fathers here. We'll put you up on Mount Rushmore, wherever that is for sales pipelines.
My goodness, the Mount Rushmore. That could be a whole show right there. If there was a Mount Rushmore for sales, who would be on that mountain?
Interesting question.
I think Zig Ziglar would have to be probably the George Washington point of prominence.
Could be good place, yeah. But who's the one that set us free? Who's the Abraham Lincoln? I don't know. I
don't know that the analogy works completely. But if we were to say like the 3 or 4 people that had the biggest impact on selling, in the history, at least in the last 100 years, 200 years, I mean, like Zig Ziglar's got to be on there. I wonder if one of the Barnum or Bailey, one of the circus guys, should be up there, given what they've done.
Could be.
Napoleon Hill has a bit of a mixed reputation, but clearly could be considered a controversial but influential member of the Mount Rushmore for sales. There would be.
And Matt Hines, who wrote the Constitution, who wrote the founding Declaration of Independence.
Well, that's part of it, right? Is like, what do you consider some of the seminal sales materials? I mean, there isn't a Declaration of Independence, but like if you were to consider, what's I don't mean to get to go too deep on this, but what's the Bible of sales? Is there a Bible of sales?
I don't know.
And I think that there probably isn't a book, but I think if you look at the content that has stood the test of time, certainly, Zig Ziglar, for sure, Jeffrey Gitomer, probably more recently, maybe the CEB guys, Brent Adamson and the Challenger sale.
I'd say it's the modern marketer's field guide. It's the field manual for all salespeople.
No, we're not. No, we have not. Thank you. I appreciate that. My great producer Paul for that. But anyway, hey, we could just prattle on for the whole half hour. We shouldn't do that. We should actually get started and bring our guests.
Maybe we should put your guest in there. Maybe we'll start running. We'll do a survey. Who wants to get etched in stone on Mount Rushmore here?
We start our lightning round of questions for every guest at the end, which I've always wanted to do. We have to figure that out at one of these days. Like one of the questions is the Mount Rushmore of sales. What would be on it? Anyway, wow. Thank you. If you're still listening, thank you for sticking around. If you're listening live, thanks for joining us on Sales Pipeline Radio. We are here every Thursday at 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 Pacific, mostly talking about B2B best practices in sales and marketing, what's working, what's not. We interview some of the best and brightest minds in sales and marketing in B2B. And, with us today, I'm very excited to have Nadjya Ghausi, who is the Vice President of Marketing at Prezi, and we're going to be talking about conversational sales presentations. We're going to talk about what that means and why it's so important for sales and marketing professionals to really pay attention to some fairly recent data that's coming out, not only from some research among sales professionals, but from Harvard as well, looking at what presentation formats work well. So Nadjya, thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me, and I'm surprised you weren't being introduced as a revolutionary.
No, I'm definitely
She's right. I should have thought of that's next 4th of July here. Yeah.
Did you guys collude on this beforehand? This is ridiculous. No, definitely none of those things. Just I'm full of hot air. I've got lots of things to say. I don't know what that makes me, but excited to have you here, Nadjya. I'm really excited about this topic because I think it's something that everybody is dealing with. I think we all think about when we need to present. Where are your slides, right? And we're used to Microsoft's done a nice job of making PowerPoint ubiquitous with a lot of companies, but there's a lot of drawbacks to the traditional slide deck. Talk a little bit about what does conversational sales presentations mean to you? What is conversational presenting? How do you define that?
Sure. Let me first paint a picture for you of what it's not, because I think it's always, how many of us have had the zombie-like experience where we're sitting in a presentation, we're at slide 113, and you're still on About Us, and you're not really respecting the time of the prospects or customers who've already done their research. They're in that meeting with you, and someone raises a question, and the response is, "I'll get back to you on that," and just that comes later. And the whole idea of conversational presenting was sort of born out of necessity. The reality is, people want to have conversations where they're presenting with the audience, not at the audience. That whole engagement model is really a critical part of the whole sales funnel. And as you well know, one of the things that we've, sort of discovered is it's also a real blind spot in investment, because all the effort that's put into coming to that moment with that individual, whether it's, live or remote, there's so much investments that have been made in all the different tools and all the different channels and all the different people just to get to that meeting. And that meeting is such a critical juncture on the move forward that how do you sort of adapt you adapt a presentation to making it sort of an engaging moment where you're able to sort of zoom in onto what topics that people want to hear about. You're able to engage them as the conversation evolves. And you think of it in terms of a nonlinear approach. You're able to adapt the conversation to your customers, and from a sales perspective, have real value, because at that point, you get your faster speed to aha, you qualify faster, potentially get to discovery sooner, reducing sales cycle time, and it's also acknowledging a lot of the research that people do coming into the presentations. So conversational presenting, we believe, is a really important skill that the best salespeople, the best marketing people will be, using that kind of an approach when interacting and engaging with their customers. And I'm super excited to share on the Harvard details with you as well, because this is a very important research recently that was published on how the medium, does a presentation's medium affect its message. So we have a lot of interesting insights from that as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that for sure. We're talking today with Nadjya Ghausi, who's the Vice President of Marketing for Prezi. And you mentioned at the beginning of your last answer, just, people who feel like, oh, I'll get to that, right? I mean, and if you're really a slave to the presentation you had prepared, that may or may not be what your prospects are interested in. It may or may not reflect what they want to lean in on or double down on. And I think sometimes the flow of the conversation is more important to keep people engaged and to really truly qualify and get to next steps than following whatever trajectory you had initially planned. And I feel like that resonates a lot with me. I feel like sometimes when I present, even if it's in a one-to-many format like on stage, sometimes I'll just naturally sort of bring something up, and you'll feel like you want to say, well, I'm stealing my own thunder because I'm stealing from a slide that is yet to come. But why couldn't that come earlier, especially if you're in that kind of a sales format? I think the one thing this does for salespeople is I think, a lot of people when they create a deck, so to speak, they use it as a crutch. But that crutch leads to less effective presentation. So to be able to do conversational presentations, you really do have to understand your content better and be listening more to your customers and to your audience, so that you're keeping them engaged and customizing the conversation to what they're really keying in on.
Absolutely. I mean, that ability to adapt your conversation, you can have your material all there, but it's the way in which you zoom in on what information they want to discover. You're respecting their time, because the one thing that you have at that moment is their attention. And attention is one of the most scarcest commodities today, just to get to that moment and get to the most relevant points quickly that they want to interact or get more information about. So there is a lot of science that goes behind it. Conversational presenting it's a combination of how the information is communicated, but also thinking about how is the information shared. For example, storytelling is something that we talk a lot about, and that is a very important way in which people engage and sort of perceive information and retain information in context. So having that visual storytelling, understanding, and almost thinking like a director, how the space is being used in the presentation to tell your story, break it up into chunks that you can address and be able to move amongst that information freely is really an important aspect. In the technologies today, things, for example, in Prezi, you're able to zoom in and zoom out so you can then get to the points and then still see the broader context at a high level. So it's almost like you're starting with a visual agenda. People know what you're going to present, and that creates some context before you actually get into getting into the details. So it's a really important way to think about how your presentation is structured as well as how it's being communicated.
So when you're within the presentation itself, making sure that is customized to the audience is important. But you guys have been busy this year. Not only I want to talk about the Harvard study, and we'll probably get to that after the break, but I also want to talk about what you guys have described as the blind spot. The blind spot of the sales process that people haven't been looking at, but through your data has really indicated a significant disadvantage for organizations that are ineffective at presenting. Can you talk a little bit about the sales blind spot, what that is, and why that's so important?
Sure. There's a couple different ways. First of all, there's the sunk cost from the tools that people are investing in today that just get to the point of finding the leads, finding the channels, the events, the nurturing, the scoring, the appends, everything just to get to that moment. But then if you use the metaphor or look at the example of the online example, there's also the leaky funnels. If you think about the click-through rates that exist today on social, even if you're at top of the page for Google or banner ads, and then kind of condense that down to the next page, which is click-throughs on websites and blogs and emails, which are in the single digit. You get to that critical moment, and that is why, that moment matters. And then when we did some research with Heinz Marketing as well, was about the what management attributed to missed goals, and 66.7% in the survey we ran it sort of attributed a missed goal to a poor presentation at that moment. So, and we found that those focused on creating engaging presentations had 60% achieved sales goals and had 57% increase in year-to-year growth performance. And in that study, we also were able to measure a difference between PowerPoint and Prezi, about 35% increased engagement by using Prezi. So that having that right tool at that moment was a really critical part. And, so going back to the attention spans and the critical nature of that moment, there was a lot of detail done around how important it was to achieving sales goals and having an engaging presentation in that what we called the blind spot, which was a shared handoff between sales and marketing, but probably one of the least invested moments in the sales cycle.
We're talking today with Nadjya Ghausi, who's the VP of Marketing at Prezi, talking about this blind spot and how important it is. Boy, you invest a lot of time and effort in getting that lead and getting that prospect engaged. And if you don't effectively present your idea and keep them qualified and closed, that is a huge missed opportunity. Sometimes we describe that as part of our sales pipeline archaeology, if you will, is uncovering where those primary problems are. We're going to have a lot more on conversational presentations. We're going to be talking about this Harvard study, which has some really, really interesting insights you're going to want to hear. We're going to take a break, pay some bills. We'll be right back on Sales Pipeline Radio.
And change in B2B marketing has never been greater. The only thing bigger is the need for clarity, for a blueprint, for a guide to what's really working and how to apply it specifically to increase sales pipeline growth, velocity, and conversion. That's what you'll find in the Modern Marketer's Field Guide. Download it free at HeinzMarketing.com.
Is your content showing less than stellar performance? Is it not bringing in the return you hope for? It might be time to revitalize your content marketing engine. Get the recording for the Modern Marketer's Workshop, Content That Converts, and start creating content that makes a visible impact on your pipeline. A fully online, on-demand workshop that includes an interactive workbook, the presentation slides, and templates, all for $195. Don't reinvent the wheel. Instead, visit www.heinzmarketing.com/workshops. That's HEINZ marketing.com and spice up your content marketing plan now.
All right, let's pick it back up with Matt and his guest. And before you do, can I ask one quick question here?
Sure, go ahead.
I wonder, I'd love to ask your guest if the rise of social media, like podcasting or other sorts of social mediums out there, has made us more conversational again, more storytelling. Because that's really what I always say this medium's about. It's a very conversational storytelling medium, and I suspect that's true of most social media. Has that influenced us back towards conversations and stories?
Nadjya, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. Social media is a combination. There's short form and there's long form, right? So in some ways, it's made people's attention spans shorter, things like Twitter with 140 characters. At the same time, people who yearn to have more detail want to have conversations. They want to sort of understand the meaning behind ideas. So what we see is there's the value of having both. If you have the context, you can kind of see what is available. At the same time, you can drill down and have the depth of the conversation you want to have in a particular topic that you want to learn more about. So it's sort of that freedom of choice. At the same time, you're right. The dialogue, the one-directional dialogues don't work anymore. People want to engage. They want to get feedback. They want to have some ability to influence the direction because time is so valuable now. So, absolutely. A lot of technologies are changing the way that people want to interact. Millennials especially. We're seeing that behavior, kind of the rise of this whole generation that has been used to using these tools on a daily basis, that they don't consume information the same way that the prior generations have.
Well, and is it not just social media, but it's also just, I think we're living in a less formal culture as well, right? You know, where it's acceptable to wear jeans and an open neck shirt to the office, where, we want to have more control as buyers of the conversation we're having. We want to do our research on our own. We don't expect someone to come in and pitch us. We don't expect someone to come in and do a front to back presentation while we sit on our hands and listen. So there's an expectation that more informal environment is going to lead to more interaction, which I think benefits both parties, but it sort of leaves a presentation format like a PowerPoint deck in the past as something that is maybe a relic of a previous time that really doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. In fact, one of the mottos we used last year was quit your pitching.
It's a good idea. Well, hey, let's talk a little more about this Harvard study. If you're interested in learning more about conversational presentations overall, Prezi has a great ebook on that. If you want to learn more about the sales blind spot, there's some great research and data and insights on the Prezi blog as well. Just go to blog.prezi.com. That's Prez as in zebra I.com, and you can check out that information there. But Nadjya, talk to us a little bit about this Harvard study. Like, I took a look at this a couple weeks ago and was fascinated by some of the results and was impressed that an organization like Harvard had picked this up and was spending time thinking about this as well. Give us a little bit of a highlight on this. I know this was just launched by you guys, I believe, earlier this week.
Yeah, actually it was launched by Harvard researchers, so it was just published in the academic journal yesterday, and we just have been sharing out on social media and also on our site the full research that was published. And, it was really born out of the interest we've heard from companies and that we've worked with, that they were able to improve performance by using Prezi, but we never had a good way to sort of understand or quantify what that difference was in using Prezi. So Harvard took an approach where they looked at it. They did a double-blind study, and they looked at how the medium affects the medium affects the message. So how the difference between having sort of a static linear approach, a nonlinear approach via something like Prezi, and then just a verbal presentation, how they performed, and then what kind of insights they could get around engagement, persuasion, and effectiveness. So what was found from the research was there was a big focus on meaningful movement. So that was a very valued part of when they looked at the alternatives. They looked at and found that features like having a virtual canvas and zooming in and out had a specific benefit because it enabled things like conversational presenting, which we're talking about. So they actually found that through this research that static slides such as PowerPoint rated no better than having no visuals at all. So, when you think about what were the key takeaways, the ability to have that dynamic nature to the presentation and be able to hone in on the key points during the presentation that was adaptable. So it's a nonlinear, non-static approach, led to a difference with Prezi having about a 16% greater engagement rate, 21% improvement difference between PowerPoint on persuasion, and a 25% difference on effectiveness. So this was all done with a double-blind test where different groups had to present and the results were calculated. So we found it was a very exciting piece of research because it sort of was one of the first ones with also a statistically significant score that actually could measure what that difference was. And so Harvard did it totally, as looking at it from a very research-driven approach of quantifying that, and that was a very exciting thing that just came out yesterday.
Oh, what's exciting about that feedback you're seeing is that that satisfaction rate is we're seeing that from both buyers and sellers. We're seeing that on both sides of the table. The presentation, those being presented to feel like it's more engaging. They feel like it's more personalized. They feel like it's a better presentation. Those presenting feel like they're getting the feedback and the next steps they really want. And that engagement sort of works on both sides. Help people understand how to balance that. I mean, I feel like there might be a little bit of a balance act between having that conversational presentation, making it sort of customized and meaningful to those being presented to, but not letting it get off track, right? Because as a presenter, especially if you're in a sales role, like you have a goal, you have an objective of where you want that conversation to go. And if it gets too off track, you may miss that objective. How do you balance conversational presentations with still sort of staying on track for your objective?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it forces the presenter to think like a director. So you know your story inside and out, from the small details to the big picture, and you have to structure it as a way that the conversation would flow. So the agenda, which is the top level, people can see what's happening, what's the progression. They're able to sort of go a step ahead, but you're always able to bring it up a level and show them whatever they're talking about in context with the bigger picture. So you can move up a level, you can move down a level. You can manage the question, think about the questions you're going to get and think about how you're going to address that. And so you don't get derailed by curiosity. You can then zoom back in to what the relevant point is that addresses that question. And you have to think about breaking up your conversation in a useful way, because every second of attention is hard won. So if you think about delivering the content the way it's consumed and breaking it into small chunks, you're then adapting your conversation and have that flexibility to answer it, but then she'll still show, again, what the relative placement of that is into your bigger story. So those are just a couple tips about how to think about structuring your presentation from make it conversational, make it adaptable, but make sure it doesn't get derailed. There's a second piece that I didn't talk much about, but at Prezi we also think about not just the delivery. We think about the visually stunning creation, the delivery, conversational part, but we also think about the analytics. So knowing what happens 5 minutes after you leave that room is really important, because that helps influence your presentation for the next time that you give it to a similar persona or set of people or even the same account, because you can know what people are interested in, where they spend their time, and how you can improve your presentation. So we always like to think of it as a learning loop. So it's not just how it's delivered, but also about how people interact with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, from firsthand experience, the Prezi team has been generous enough to take a couple of my keynotes from earlier this year and convert them into a Prezi format. And I will tell you that the impact on the audience is not just, the conversational format, but, you referenced, sort of the visual nature. These presentations have been made far more beautiful than a normal Matt Heinz, set of slides. And I think you've gotten a lot of great feedback afterward on the format, on just the engaging nature of the way that the images move around and sort of, start from sort of a common place, go deep, come back out. It puts the whole thing in context and makes it look really good. And I think that, there's many different elements that can make you look sharp when you're able to adapt the conversation to what someone cares the most about. And your comment about seeing things afterward. I mean, you can post these presentations online. You can update them ongoing online, and you can see where your prospects are engaged. You can see what parts of the presentation they're spending the most time on, so that your follow-up can be managed accordingly. Just a couple more minutes left here with Nadjya Ghausi, who's the vice president of marketing at Prezi. Where can people find more information? I know that when we talked about the blog post, where should people go to learn more about this Harvard study?
So we have a couple of things. We have a press release that has a link to it. We also have in our blog section a abstract, and that also has more detail as well. And you'll find it on all our social posts as well. So any of our Facebook, LinkedIn, you'll see a million different ways that you can connect with the information on Prezi.com. By the way, I wanted to mention something on the Harvard study, is that there was also one element that people who delivered using the Prezi format were rated more knowledgeable and professional. So there you go, Matt. That feeling you had translated to your audience.
Yeah, it makes a big difference, because everyone's getting up and doing their slides, and we know that a lot of slide decks are quite terrible. And I think when you're just kind of moving through the same kind of format, it just becomes a little monotonous. Come back with something different, a little sharper, maybe better looking, better design. It certainly stands out. All right, one last question for you to appease my producer Paul. We began the conversation today talking about the Mount Rushmore of sales, and if there were 3 or 4 people on a mountain that were sort of from a sales and marketing standpoint. They were immortalized as sort of maybe not the founding fathers, but some of the really most influential people. Kind of reach back as in your years of doing sales and marketing, who are some of the people that have influenced you most? Speakers, authors, coaches, trainers, who, you don't have to give 4, but like one or two people that might be on that Mount Rushmore of sales for you.
I would probably put Philip Kotler, just from way back when, marketing principles. I would put maybe Seth Godin on that list. Yep. On Marketing Tribes. I would probably put the Challenger sales guy or whatever. I agree that whole initiative was something that I saw. And gosh, see the rise of CRM. I don't know if there's one person. There's a set of companies right in there. I'm trying to think who else I would put in there. But that whole idea of automating what was sort of a manual interaction. I'm trying to think. God, that's a good question. I don't know who the individuals I would put on for the 4th, but somebody. I don't know.
Paul, I'm impressed. I mean, I threw that out of the blue. She did not know that was coming. Those were some great answers. We will post those and links to some of those authors and influencers in the columns. We will also, on the notes for this presentation today, we will post a link to the Conversational Presenting eBook, as well as the Harvard study that was just announced this week. Some pretty exciting stuff there. If you like what you're hearing today on Conversational Presentations and want to share these comments from Nadjya with your team and with others, you can always catch the on-demand version of these episodes, every episode at salespipelinadio.com. If you want to make sure you never miss another episode, subscribe to our podcast. We are at the Google Play and iTunes Store. Catch us there anytime and always live right here on Sales Lead Management Radio every Thursday at 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 Pacific. Want to thank our guest again so much, Nadjya Ghausi, the VP of Marketing from Prezi. We'll be back next week. Unless he has to reschedule again, we've got the infamous Grant Cardone, who very, very likely could be one of those names given his influence up on that Mount Rushmore of sales. We might have to ask him that question, who he would put up there and whether he would put himself up there as well. But anyway, look forward to seeing everyone next week. This is Matt Hines. Thanks for joining us. See you next week on Sales Pipeline Radio.
You've been riding along as we explore the sales pipeline with Matt Hines from Hines Marketing, right here on the Funnel Radio channel for at-work listeners like you.